My Weirder School, Book Number 8. Dr. Nicholas is Ridiculous. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pelot. Chapter 1. The Big Test. My name is AJ and I hate tests. Tests are no fun at all. If you ask me, we should take all the tests and throw them into a giant garbage can. No, I take that back. If you ask me, we should throw all the tests into a giant paper shredder. Shredding paper is cool. Sometimes my dad lets me shred papers for him at home. I wish I could shred stuff all day long, especially tests. At school the other day, we were minding our own business when our teacher, Mr. Granite, said the most horrible thing in the history of the world. Clear off your desks. It's time for the test. What? Everybody yelled. No! Shouted Michael, who never ties his shoes. I didn't study for a test, shouted Ryan, who will eat anything, even stuff that isn't food. That's not fair, shouted Alexia, this girl who rides a skateboard all the time. You didn't tell us we were going to have a test, shouted Neil, who we call the nude kid even though he wears clothes. Everybody was freaking out. It was like we just heard the news that a meteor was about to destroy the Earth. Well, almost everybody was freaking out. I love tests, said Andrea Young, this annoying girl with curly brown hair. Me too, said her crybaby friend Emily, who agrees with everything Andrea says. Tests are fun. Those two probably study for tests when they could be watching TV or playing video games and having fun. What is their problem? Relax, said Mr. Granite. Every student in the state is taking this test today. You don't have to study for it. The Board of Education just wants to find out how much you know. I'm Board of Education, I announced. Mr. Granite walked around the room and put a sheet of paper on each of our desks, face down. Do you all have a number 2 pencil? He asked. We all started giggling because Mr. Granite said number 2. Everybody knows what number 2 means, and it doesn't have anything to do with pencils. They should really use a different number for pencils so kids wouldn't confuse them with the other number 2. Take your time, Mr. Granite told us. These are questions every American should be able to answer. In fact, many of these questions are given to people who want to become citizens of our country. What if I don't know the answers? I asked. Don't worry, AJ, said Mr. Granite. This test will be a piece of cake. It didn't look like a piece of cake to me. It looked like a piece of paper. What did cake have to do with taking a test anyway? Hey, maybe we were going to get cake after we finished taking the test. When I say go, turn over your test sheet, said Mr. Granite. Ready, set, go! Chapter 2. A Piece of Cake. I turned over my test sheet and looked at the questions. There were 14 of them. The top line said we had to fill in the blanks. I grabbed my pencil. 1. Who was the first president? Well, that was easy. I wrote down the answer. Abraham Lincoln. Next. 2. What is the 4th of July? Any dumbhead knows that. I figured it had to be a trick question, like what color is the White House? I wrote down the answer. It's the 4th day in July. Hey, this test wasn't going to be so hard after all. 3. Where was the Declaration of Independence signed? I had to think about that one for a minute. I've seen my mom and dad sign contracts and stuff at home. I wrote at the bottom. 4. Can you name the 13 original colonies? That was simple. I wrote, yes, I can. 5. What are the 3 branches of our government? I wasn't sure about this one. Mr. Granite once told us about 3 somethings, I remembered, so I wrote them down. The Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. 6. Where does freedom of speech come from? Any dumbhead knows that. I wrote, your mouth. 7. Name one benefit of being a citizen of the United States. There are lots of good things about our country, but there was only room for one answer, so I wrote candy. 8. Who did we fight in the Revolutionary War? I had no idea who we fought in the Revolutionary War. I looked around to see if I could copy the answer from someone else. Little Miss Know-It-All was sitting in front of me, and she knows everything. Psst, I whispered to Andrea. Who did we fight in the Revolutionary War? I'm not telling, Andrea whispered back. That would be cheating, Arlo. She calls me by my real name because she knows I don't like it. I leaned over to Ryan, who was sitting next to me. Psst. Who did we fight in the Revolutionary War? The Galactic Empire, Ryan whispered to me. Ryan knows just about everything there is to know about Star Wars, so he had to be right. I wrote down, the Galactic Empire. No talking, please, said Mr. Granite. 9. Who becomes President of the United States if President should die? Easy, I wrote, Chuck Norris. 10. Who makes the laws in the United States? Again, I wrote Chuck Norris. I was almost finished with the test. 11. Who said, give me liberty or give me death? I leaned over to Alexia, who was sitting on my other side. Psst, I whispered. Who said, give me liberty or give me death? Henry, Alexia whispered. Henry who? Patrick, Alexia whispered. Well, which is it? I asked her. Henry or Patrick? Both, she whispered. No talking, please, said Mr. Granite. I wrote Henry and Patrick. 12. What are the duties of Congress? I giggled because duties sounds just like duties, and we're not supposed to talk about that in school. But all I could think about was a bunch of politicians sitting on toilet bowls. I wasn't sure what to write, so I just put down number 2. 13. Who invented the light bulb? I had no idea. Psst, I whispered to Michael, who was sitting behind me. Who invented the light bulb? Bob Lightbulb, he whispered back. Bob Lightbulb? I had never heard of anybody named Bob Lightbulb. Michael may have been yanking my chain, but I know that a lot of stuff was named after the people who invented it, like McDonald's, and that vacuum cleaner was named after President Hoover. Maybe Michael was right. I wrote Bob Lightbulb. 14. Who helped the Pilgrims when they came to America? When the Pilgrims came to America, they probably had to chop down trees, build their own houses, and work on all kinds of do-it-yourself projects like that. So there could only be one answer. I wrote down Home Depot. Finally, the dumb test was finished. Andrea was done before anybody else, of course. She was sitting there all proud of herself. Mr. Granite came around and collected our papers. Now that wasn't so bad, was it? He asked. It was a piece of cake, Andrea announced. Why is everybody always talking about cake? And why can't a truck full of cakes fall on Andrea's head? Chapter 3. Bad News. After a few days, we all forgot about that dumb test. Life went on. Andrea was annoying as usual. I had a pee-wee football game and my team won. Ryan had his birthday and his mom brought in brownies for the whole class. A week later, Mr. Granite was trying to teach us math when an announcement came over the loudspeaker. All classes, please report to the all-purpose room for an assembly. Not again, yelled Mr. Granite. Every time he tries to teach us math, we get called to an assembly. We had to walk 1,100,000 miles to the all-purpose room, which has a dumb name because you can't go scuba diving in there. Neil the nude kid was the line leader. Alexia was the door holder. When we got to the all-purpose room, I had to sit between Andrea and Emily. Andrea's elbow touched my elbow for a second, and I thought I was gonna die. Our principal, Mr. Klutz, was waiting for us on the stage. He has no hair at all. I mean none. I bet his head slips off the pillow when he's trying to sleep at night. I just got the results back from the test you took last week, Mr. Klutz announced. I hope we did well, Emily whispered to Andrea. I know I got all the answers right, Andrea whispered back. I looked them up in my encyclopedia when I got home. Our school did horribly, Mr. Klutz announced. What? Everybody gasped. Elementary school got the worst scores in the whole county, said Mr. Klutz, shaking his head sadly. I went to a meeting, and the principal of Maroa Forsyth Grade School was laughing at me. Clearly, you children don't know basic history. I hate to say this, but if we don't bring up our test scores, our school is going to be closed." I jumped up from my seat. "Yay!" I shouted. "No more school! No more school! No more school!" I figured everybody was going to jump up from their seats and start chanting "No more school" with me. I looked around. Nobody else was standing. Nobody else was chanting. Everybody was looking at me. Oops, I hate when that happens. I sat back down in my seat. "You probably got all the answers wrong, Arlo," Andrea whispered to me. "I bet that's why our school did so poorly." "Your face got all the answers wrong," I whispered back at Andrea. "That doesn't even make any sense, Arlo." "Your face doesn't make any sense," I told Andrea. Everybody was talking and whispering to each other until Mr. Klutz held up his hand and made a peace sign, which means "shut up." "I have decided to bring in a professor from the local college to help teach you students history," he announced. "What?" Everybody gasped again. "We don't want to learn history from some boring college teacher," somebody yelled. Everybody was upset, even some of the teachers. "Oh, you're going to like Dr. Nicholas," Mr. Klutz told us. "She's a world-famous historian who has traveled everywhere and written many books about history. She was even on Oprah." Everybody gasped and said, "Wow," which is Mom upside down. "What was she doing on Oprah?" asked Ryan. "She should get off Oprah," said Michael. "Oprah could get hurt," said Alexia. "Is Oprah okay?" said Emily. "Who's Oprah?" I asked. "Dr. Nicholas will be coming into your classroom to teach you some basic history that everyone should know," said Mr. Klutz. "Then a week from today, you'll get a chance to take that test over again. I think that with the help of Dr. Nicholas, you're going to score much higher, and I'll be able to laugh at those other principals. That will be icing on the cake." "More cake? Why is everybody always talking about cake?" "And now," Mr. Klutz said with a big sweep of his arm, "I'd like to introduce Dr. Nicholas."